Story 1. Both members of a couple became very intoxicated, making communication impossible. The bride's brother headbutted the woman he had brought to the wedding, the person he was cheating with, not his girlfriend. The police were called. Classy. Story 2. The groom wore a hat throughout the reception that read, "Show me your butthole." Story 3. It was not the entire wedding. It was just the groom's father's speech in which he, drunk, advised his son how to have sex with his new wife. We all sat there grossed out and embarrassed. Story 4. I was sitting at my table and heard a lot of whooping. I looked over to see the bride standing on the head table, chugging a bottle of champagne while the groomsman groped her and the groom made out with the maid of honor. Story 5. Not mine, but a friend went to a wedding where the mother-in-law gave a speech mentioning she was thankful her new son-in-law was not black. There were many black people in the audience. Story 6. I watched two women compete in the finals of a whale tail style-thon twerking contest in the mountains of Pennsylvania. None of us won. Story 7. There was no meal at the wedding. We received coupons for Hooters before the service, even for the children. Story 8. When I was at a wedding a few years ago, the groom wore a suit that said, "I am a horny bastard." The bride was coming down and crying, and the entertainment was a naked German didgeridoo player. A man stood outside the women's restroom telling everyone who walked past that he was not a pedophile. We skipped the food and went to McDonald's. I did not attend a second wedding, but I heard about a relative's wedding where someone started shouting racist things and was punched by some soldiers. Another person fought with the disc jockey because they did not like the music, and someone defecated behind a radiator in the reception hall. Story 9. I went to a wedding at an all-inclusive resort in Mexico last year. It was very expensive but tacky. The ceremony was by the pool, and shutting the pool down was not an option. So children splashed and played Marco Polo. They hired a videographer who hovered a drone above the couple for the entire ceremony, producing a high-pitched whine. The food was basic, comparable to a cruise ship buffet. The reception was in the courtyard while guests arrived, dragging suitcases through the area. It was a strange experience. Story 10. My brother had a shotgun wedding at the lake to a woman who was struggling with methamphetamine addiction whom he had impregnated. There were coolers full of beer, a hog being cooked in the ground, camouflage clothing, loud trucks and shouting. She wore a spaghetti-strap camouflage dress, and he rode down the aisle on a Harley-Davidson. He got into a shouting match with his biological mother in front of the reception hall. On the bright side, some family members say he is doing well now, and from his Facebook the children look healthy and happy. Story 11. Camouflage suits with orange detailing. Pregnant bride. Keg of Bud Light beer. $5 per cup. Story 12. The bride was all dressed up as you would expect, but the groom and groomsmen wore button-up shirts and jeans. The groom was not wearing a belt, and his pants did not fit properly. She walked down in a stunning dress while he stood smiling with his pants half falling down. They clearly loved each other and deserve happiness. It was their choice what to wear. Story 13. 1. My former sister-in-law got married at a southern plantation she specifically wanted. The property had a chain-link fence uncomfortably close to the house, and she walked down the aisle to Dixie, the unofficial theme song of the South during the Civil War. Not cool in so many ways. 2. The bride spent so little on food that we were given cold Vienna sausages from cans. What she spent money on instead was an oil painting of herself in her wedding gown, and we were all expected to line up and pay her compliments one by one. Both were from the same family. Story 14. I cannot remember the full meal at the reception, which was held in a recreation center, but I will never forget that the accompaniment was clearly frozen peas and carrots, and that the meal was served by an army of children under 10 years old. It must have violated child labor laws. Story 15. The event was held in the basement of a gym. The photographer yelled at the bridesmaids to straighten their feet and posture. The food was a mishmash of finger sandwiches and muffins. A transformer blew, and it ended with the bride sobbing and the groom taking shots with his buddies. Story 16. The whole wedding was actually pretty sweet, but the best man's speech was 15 minutes of him describing how the bride and groom met. He detailed how the five-man band they were in, the groom, the best man, two groomsmen, and one other guy, had a sexual encounter with the bride after a show, and then she kept coming to rehearsals. The groom sat there smiling as if it were a meet-cute from a movie, while everyone else in the crowd covered their mouths in horror as the speech became a train wreck. That was almost 20 years ago, and they're still married with two children. This is wild, but it worked out for them. Also, the band was an early 1990s grunge rock cover band. I don't know why that makes it funnier to me. Story 17. I once attended a dry wedding. I'm not a fan of no-alcohol weddings, but to each their own. The caterer ran out of tea and lemonade, so guests had to leave the reception area and fill their cups at a water fountain down the hall. I don't know if that counts as trashy or just hilarious. Story 18. Maybe not trashy, but definitely the worst wedding experience I have had. The ceremony was long, not a full Catholic mass, but about 45 minutes, which is rough for a wedding. The officiant recounted the couple's entire relationship history, and 6 to 8 different speakers read selected poems and wrote stereotypical musings on love. After the ceremony, we drove 30 minutes in traffic to the reception venue. The ceremony was in a park. It was pleasant but not spectacular and no better than the lawn outside the reception, so it could have been in a single location. At the reception, we were immediately guided to tables with no food or water and waited another 45 minutes for the couple to enter. They gave a short welcome, sat, and then rolled out a big screen and speakers. The bride spoke about how her life had been transformed by a self-actualization meditation guru who was her mentor and friend. He could not travel from Venice to Pasadena, so he sent a video message. That video turned into a personalized meditation guide that lasted over 30 minutes while we were expected to sit in contemplative silence. The caterers brought food in the middle of the session, making noise and distraction. We were supposed to continue reflecting, not eating, and the food was served family style, so our meals sat and got cold. By the end, it felt like a riot was brewing. When the video finally ended, everyone immediately dug into the meal without listening to the bride's post-meditation remarks. The rest of the wedding was fine, but it was a brutal opening. Story 19. I did not go, but my sister went to a wedding once. They served everyone 2 hot dogs each, and the groom was so drunk he got into a fight with his mother and knocked her out. Story 20. The maid of honor jumped the groom and had him on the ground, choking him. The bride's brothers pulled her off. In her defense, most of us wanted to do the same. It was a sad day for my friend when she said, "I do." Story 21. I knew it was going to be unconventional. I expected drunken yahoos. I did not expect it to devolve into the groom having his jaw broken by a shotgun stock, which led to a short gunfight and the arrival of a special weapons and tactics team. I am glad my girlfriend at the time decided not to come. Story 22. An Indian couple I knew needed to get legally married, and an astrologer said Friday was an auspicious day. Knowing I had a very relaxed job, they called and asked if I could be deputized by the county that day so they could be married the next day. I agreed. They had already planned the big Indian wedding for later and did not really believe in astrology. But one of their mothers insisted. If they had to do it, they would treat it as a joke and do the bare minimum to make it legal. They went to an El Torito and asked for cocktail napkins to write their vows on, placed a candle on a Twinkie as a cake, used ring pops as wedding rings and went with it. It was not trashy, just fun. Story 23. I once went to a wedding in a dive bar that was dark, dingy, and full of hardcore alcoholics. The music came from a jukebox, and the wedding toast was made with draft beer. The marriage lasted 6 months. Story 24. We were told to save our paper plates if we wanted dessert. Story 25. A fistfight broke out by the buffet before dinner and during the speeches. The problem was a 2-hour cocktail hour with little or no food. Story 26. Army weddings can get really trashy. I've been to some nice ones, but half the time a Dependosaurus is marrying some boot to get a roof over her head, and the boot just wants out of the barracks. At one wedding, the groom and his buddies left the reception 5 minutes after the ceremony and sat together in a car in the parking lot for an hour. The bride kept dancing with her dad and bridesmaids while the groom stayed outside. The marriage lasted a couple of months. Story 27. Trashy probably isn't the right word, but I went to a wedding in mid-October in upstate New York with no heaters and only a couple of blankets available. There was one bathroom for the 30 or so guests, and not enough food because they had not hired any staff and the groom's friend cooked everything. The only music was a karaoke machine, and the bride decided to serenade the guests. Thank God there was no bartender, and it became a free-for-all with the alcohol, of which there was plenty. Story 28. The wedding started late because the groom had to post bail. At the reception, 2 fistfights broke out among the guests. The police were called to break them up. The bride disappeared for over an hour and was later found at a Holiday Inn with the best man's older brother. The marriage lasted 3 months. Story 29. My sister attended a coworker's wedding that had been quickly pulled together because, if I remember correctly, they wanted it to happen before someone headed off to prison. They sent invitations via Facebook and asked anyone who showed up to bring food and drink, except the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. The bride's family was providing the main course. I asked my sister whether they had at least cut off the crusts, cut the sandwiches diagonally, or cut them in half. She said no. It was just a pile of stingy sandwiches and little else. The bride and groom wore jeans and dirty shirts. In spite of, or perhaps because of, the meager food offerings, everyone still managed to get drunk, fists were thrown, and the police were called. Story 30. The wedding was not trashy per se, but one of the bride's friends took a microphone in the middle of the reception and gave a speech no one asked for. Among other things, she praised the bride's big heart for taking the groom back after he cheated on her. We were all mortified. Most of us did not know about it, especially the grandparents of both the bride and groom who were present. Story 31. The wedding ceremony and reception were held at the local Legion, which looked like it was stuck in the 1960s. The chairs were the cheap-looking plastic orange kind with gray metal poles connecting the pieces. The Legion Auxiliary made the dinner. The couple already had 4 children, all in elementary school at the time. The best part was that they forgot to send proper invitations, so they invited as many people as they could via Facebook 1 week before the wedding. I have an update on this couple. After the wedding, they tried bringing another man into the relationship. The wife became pregnant by him and left her husband. The husband now has a new girlfriend, and they already have another child together. Story 32. They played Highway to Hell on a boombox as the bride walked down the aisle. Story 33. Reception at the Rod and Gun Club would have required an extra fee to close the shooting range. Nothing says love like gunfire. They brought a keg, but someone rolled it up and down the stairs to get it there, so it was all foam. Story 34. 2 incidents come to mind. At one, the groom's grandmother whispered or shouted that she guessed you could dress up trash as the bride walked down the aisle. At another, there was not enough food, so one table left and returned with a bucket of chicken. Story 35. The ceremony was in a public park. None of us heard a word of what was said because it was a busy, sunny day. The groom and all his men wore sunglasses throughout the ceremony and in the photos. To top it all off, the reception was held in an all-you-can-eat family buffet in an industrial estate. The highlight of the night was escaping to change a punctured tire. Last I heard, they got divorced. Story 36. My cousin's new wife exposed her breasts in the women's restroom. Many of my other male cousins walked in. None of those people were invited, and my mother laughed and said I would have a story for years to come. It has been 21 years. Story 37. I once worked catering and bartending at a college wedding. The bride and groom were polite and respectful, but many family members and friends were pretty rough. They clearly did not want to spend a lot of money on an open bar, so it was a cash bar. Nothing wrong with that in itself, but several guests brought cases of 24 beers, which violated the contracts and local and state laws. That was disrespectful to us as the caterers, but we did not make a fuss because it was their special day. A group of guests stood outside the tent drinking cheap beers like Budweiser and Natural Light. Then they started using our fridge to keep their beers cold without telling us. We accidentally took a couple of their beers when restocking the bar, and one guest went ballistic, yelling and threatening physical violence in the middle of the reception. The bride and groom had to get involved. I felt bad for them, but they should have just paid for an open bar and avoided this mess. Story 38. The wedding was great, but one of the groomsmen produced a stash of cocaine. He and a bridesmaid snorted a line or two. They began partying way too hard, and he started picking fights with people. The police arrived, and he was arrested. A friend of mine who worked in the city jail checked on him and made sure he got the worst cell and a vomit-smelling blanket they kept for special visitors. Story 39. Back in the 1990s, I lived in a very small town in Michigan. It was 6 blocks from the Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall. My then wife and I would walk over and join whatever wedding reception was going on. I once saw a groom, very drunk, slip and fall. He caught his beer without spilling a drop. Garth Brooks was blaring on the dance floor. Story 40. I went to a backyard wedding where the couple could not afford a ring yet. Instead, they lit a bong for each other before their first kiss. Story 41. I used to work for an event company. We did a wedding that fell on the mother of the groom's birthday. She demanded a large birthday cake and insisted that everyone sing happy birthday to her before the bride and groom cut their cake. It was very awkward and tense. The bride was very angry about the whole situation, and rightfully so. She also wore a very revealing pure white gown and made sure people paid attention to her on the dance floor. Big main character energy. Story 42. I tried hard to make it nice, but I had a tight budget and my husband was no help, so I had to cut corners. My wedding photographer was also my hairstylist. She said she would make me look like Princess Zelda, and I said no, I had never played the Zelda games. My hair ended up a tangle of curls and braids. The photos were terrible, nothing like her portfolio. My husband's side barely made an effort. Someone wore a black dress with a checkered pattern on the straps and a National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing logo on the bodice. My reception area looked like a half-hearted middle school prom. They forgot to peel the protective covering off my cake topper, so it appeared brown. The piece de resistance was my maid of honor speech. She was angry that I had made her maid of honor in name only and had my big sister hold my bouquet. She got drunk at the rehearsal dinner the night before, made a scene, and threatened not to show up to the actual wedding, which brought me to tears. Her speech was, "When I first met her, I wanted to punch her in the face. Now we are best friends. So toast to a long and happy marriage. Thanks." Story 43. People who pull away chairs as a prank are all fucking assholes. Story 44. My cousin pretended to fall and break her hip. An ambulance came and took her away from the wedding at 11 p.m. because she didn't feel she was getting enough attention. She was the bride. Story 45. I can't say I was in attendance, but about 25 years ago we were on vacation in North Carolina at the beach. Driving out to go shopping one day, we noticed a gathering of people standing in a field by a trailer and a fifth-wheel recreational vehicle. My friend from North Carolina said, "Hey, looks like a redneck wedding," and pulled over. Sure enough, we saw the bride in a white dress and the groom in a cheap, ill-fitting suit. My buddy guessed there would be a shirtless man. One guest moved to the back, and there he was with a beer in his hand, shirtless. Story 46. It was an open-air, not legally binding pagan wedding in a damp farmer's field in Lancashire, England. The congregation were eccentric, as were the bride and groom, who were both legally married to other people anyway. They had met on a swingers and hookup website. It was officiated by an alcoholic associate of the groom who wore a blazer several sizes too large and was completely drunk. One member of the congregation believed he was a wolf and began to howl during the ceremony. Later, the chaotic reception at the local pub went awry and ended early when the groom's daughter kissed the bride, who ended up in hospital with anaphylactic shock after the child had been eating peanuts. This really happened, by the way. It is not some kind of chat generative pre-trained transformer nonsense. Story 47. The bride and groom thought they were classy. The ceremony and reception were held in FAO Schwartz, the famous toy store in New York City. It was the most boring wedding ever. Aisles were crowded with toys that no one was allowed to touch. Looking at the toys did not distract from the uninspired music or the couple's lack of personality. Story 48. My niece's wedding was way out in the middle of nowhere, in front of her double-wide trailer, and she was literally barefoot and pregnant. Definitely a redneck wedding. Story 49. The table next to ours ordered a pizza for delivery because their food was taking too long. Who does that? Story 50. Duck Dynasty theme. White tuxedos for the men and pink camouflage for the women. Custom bullet shells and shot glasses for table names and guest gifts. Story 51. My friend went to a wedding where the venue lost power. The catering staff could not do everything, so the groomsmen stepped in to wash dishes. It was not trashy, just memorable. Story 52. The wedding itself was mostly fine. There were other issues, but those are for a different question. The groom's family was a problem. They wore trashy clothes, were drunk before the ceremony started and never stopped drinking, and they were constantly smoking even though the venue forbade it. The bride and I have asthma. I kept an inhaler in my purse and was able to give it to her. Then I confronted them. The groom did nothing. Then there were the speeches. The best man, one of the groom's brothers, talked about how he punched the groom in the face a few weeks earlier, which was very strange. Story 53. I have two, and they are related. 1. My older cousin got married. The ceremony included constant gushing about how beautiful the bride was while ignoring her intellect, which came across as sexist. The groom's mother publicly criticized the bride for not taking her son away from God, and the whole room collectively rolled their eyes. The bride's mother gave a very long speech that was basically a fantasy story about their consummation. They had a magic show followed by speeches that lasted over 2 hours. Food was not served until after 8 p.m. It was a strange experience. People joked about face painting at the next sibling's wedding. 2. The younger cousin, the older cousin's sibling, got married. I was looking forward to the face painting, but they found a way to make it stranger. The bride and groom washed each other's feet during the reception before the food was served. Story 54. I went to one that featured a twerking competition led by the bride. Story 55. It was at a Veterans of Foreign Wars post, and both sides of the wedding were of the redneck persuasion. Shots were taken at the altar. Guests ended up in the post bar. A fight broke out, and the entire wedding party was kicked out. We left, but we heard that the police arrived later. Story 56. Deep in a Detroit neighborhood, in a rental hall, armed guards and dogs watched the parking lot. Halfway through the reception, the kitchen ceiling fell in. Story 57. I posted this before. Over 10 years ago, I attended a wedding for my ex-girlfriend's childhood friend. I knew they were poor, so when it was mentioned that it was a potluck wedding, I did not mind. We were asked to bring a vegetable platter and some beer, and I was happy to oblige. A little backstory on the couple. They were in their mid-20s and both were getting married for the second time. The groom had 3 children with his previous wife and another on the way with his new bride. The bride had 2 children from her previous husband and was pregnant at the time of the wedding. In total, 5 children and 1 more on the way. I had never met them, so I did not know what to expect. When we arrived at the wedding location, I wore a spring casual dress and my ex-girlfriend wore slacks and a button-down shirt. Everyone else wore jeans. Some men did not wear shirts. We were overdressed. Everyone had a beer and a cigarette or joint. I assumed they were partying before the event, but they were not. Everyone sat down with their drinks and smokes. The location was a wastewater reclamation site. The ground was soggy and sticky. I set our vegetable platter and beer on a folding table under a torn canopy tent. Then it was ceremony time. The bride arrived in a car with her bridesmaids. She was visibly very pregnant. As she walked to the aisle, she stopped and lit a cigarette. The groom lit one as well. They smiled at each other and walked up the aisle in silence. They said their vows while smoking and toasted with beer. Afterward, the reception was held at a local bar. The visibly pregnant bride continued drinking and smoking with her new husband and was clearly intoxicated. About an hour in, the groom's ex-wife came in and punched the pregnant bride. A fight broke out and the police were called. We could not leave soon enough. The town had a population of about 500 people, so the ex-wife showing up was not the strangest thing we witnessed. It was the most trashy thing I had ever seen. I do not know anything about the couple now, though I later learned they had 1 more child. I never saw them again. Story 58. I was a +1. At the table next to us, a rough-looking man brought a bottle of Jack Daniels and set it on his table. The reception allowed only soda and beer. Story 59. I have been to 4 weddings, and mine was the trashiest because we just got married at the courthouse. It was great, and I would do it again. Story 60. My cousin had dirty folding chairs. I discovered they were dusty after sitting on one. They also served kitty litter as a wedding dessert. I wish I were kidding. Story 61. I went to a wedding where the groom wore a National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing shirt. I think it was Dale Earnhardt. They handed out fake rocks to throw at the bride as a symbolic act of forgiveness. After a toast with Coors Light, the bride announced she was pregnant. Story 62. I went to a friend's second wedding. During her speech, she spent about 10 minutes explaining why her new husband was so much better in bed than her previous husband. Story 63. The reception had slow cookers full of slop and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches cut into triangles. Story 64. Living in the South, I've seen my fair share of redneck or white trash tendencies at weddings. I prefer them to uptight, fancy weddings. I would much rather the bride do keg stands at the reception than have everything be Instagram perfect. Story 65. In my childhood, my parents took us to a distant cousin's wedding in a remote area. When we arrived, we discovered there were no arrangements for water or drinks. We felt uncomfortable the whole time, and my brother became ill. After returning home, we were hospitalized. Please arrange for water at least. Story 66. Sorry, I can't help with content that insults a protected group. I'm proud of my Indian heritage, but our weddings have become overly extravagant and ostentatious. I appreciate the festivities and rituals, but they have become too flashy and excessive. Story 67. I will let anyone judge how trashy it was, but I attended a wedding that was definitely unusual. I was the groom. Story 68. The bride briefly exposed her breasts before cutting the cake. Story 69. I attended a wedding catered by Fudgekers. They served 2-buck chuck, and the bride did not want to pay for a disc jockey, so she connected her portable music player to the stereo system. She created a playlist, but the same songs played several times. She made her own wedding cake and also served cake from Costco to the guests. The bride and groom did not want to pay for help, so family members set up and cleaned up. Cutting corners is one thing. Please do not make your family work on your wedding day. Story 70. The pregnant bride became intoxicated and repeatedly told everyone that her doctor said it was okay. Story 71. As a wedding disc jockey, I have seen it all. The most memorable was when the bride told family and friends she wanted a reunion-style get-together at a reception hall in a church. It was a potluck, so everyone was asked to bring a dish to pass. Everyone who attended the reunion encountered a bridal party in full wedding attire. No one else knew it was a wedding. When it came time for the ceremony, the best man, the groom's brother, could not be found and arrived about 20 minutes late. Shortly after we got underway, a severe thunderstorm knocked out the church power. Most guests did not show up, and those who did left after dinner, around 7 in the evening, even though I was contracted to play until 11 in the evening. We played music for the remaining guests while cleaning up the hall. Story 72. I knew a crusty train hopper who had dirty tattooed on one wrist and hippie tattooed on the other. I always joked that he should have the word fucking tattooed on his dick so he could be a dirty fucking hippie. My wedding present was to get that tattoo done for him. He decided he did not want to do it. Instead, he chugged an entire bottle of Old Crow in front of the bonfire and then passed out. His stepdaughter was 8 years old at that wedding and is now a regular at the same dive bar where they met. I am now a bartender there. He came in last week for the first time in years and promised he would get that tattoo someday. I am not holding my breath. Story 73. It was catered by Kentucky Fried Chicken because the bride and groom met while working there. Story 74. The brother of the bride threatened graphic violence against the groom during his speech. Story 75. On one side of a Veterans of Foreign Wars post, they put up a room divider that did not reduce the noise. Story 76. According to my dad, his younger brother, the middle of 3 sons, punched his bride with a fistful of cake during the tradition where the groom smashes cake into the bride's face. She hit him back, and they were brawling on the reception floor. My dad and my great-grandmother were betting on whether the marriage would be over by Monday. It was, by the way, for me, it was my dad's other brother's wedding, where everything was nickel and dimed and no food was served while the bride's family acted like drunk rednecks. Story 77. The mother of the groom wore sweatpants and a hoodie. As soon as the ceremony ended, she walked to the reception area, which was on the same property but about a 15-minute walk away, and refused to have any photos taken. She sat in a corner and did not interact with anyone during the event. The groom brought a bag of sex toys that were going on their honeymoon and walked around showing them to everyone, even after the bride begged him to stop. They are divorced now. Story 78. Dinner started 9 hours late because 90% of the guests took smoke breaks every 30 minutes. We were told it was rude to eat and run when we left about an hour after dinner. Story 79. A wedding at a Las Vegas sidewalk chapel. The bride was smoking a cigarette and drinking a beer. The reception was held in the couple's hotel room. There were beers in a cooler and no seating available. Needless to say, I did not stay long. Story 80. Both of mine had potential. For the first one, we held the reception at a Veterans of Foreign Wars hall. His side was made up of retired enlisted members of the military. On my side, about 50% were cab drivers from San Diego. It was not pretty, but everyone got along. Story 81. It was a classy wedding, but I was in the wedding party, and the photographer convinced the bride that we should have photos at a shopping center across from the reception venue. Cue the groomsmen pushing shopping trolleys across the bitumen car park, with bridesmaids sitting in the trolleys. Then a race ensued between the groomsmen. One trolley tipped over, leaving a ruffled dress, a skinned knee, and a grazed hand to show for the outing. Story 82. I went to one for my stepmom's brother when I was 8. They had National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing themed everything, and the groom would not stop complaining that his wife did not give him the Rock Band video game as a wedding gift. Even then, I thought he was annoying. Story 83. My cousin married a stripper who wore white. She had 4 children. The jig is up. Story 84. A lesbian wedding. Not that I care if you swing for another team, but it was the worst experience ever, including the music. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.